Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've made the connection and are with us today. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us in ways that get us thinking, get us connected, and perhaps inspired or challenged to do just a bit more because we've made that connection. Our topic today is building connections through art. We have both on stage as well as authoring a book. In our first segment, we have Susie Jewell, who will be sharing about 10,000 Things Theater and her role in the current show, The Most Happy Fella. And in our second and third, we'll be having a conversation with author David Lupaco about his new book, He Didn't Know What He Didn't Know. So thank you for joining us today on our artistic journey. Susie Jewell, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted, and I'm looking forward to come seeing you in this show. It sounds like it's amazing. And a little bit for our audience, Susie is an active singer, actor, dancer here in the Twin Cities. She's appeared on stage with Casting Spells Productions, the Guthrie Frank Theater, the Minnesota Centennial Showboat, Moo Performing Arts, the Ordway, Park Square Theater, Second Fiddle, Sheep Theater, Skylark Opera, Theater for the Thirsty, and Walking Shadow. And now she is currently in 10,000 Things. Susie, you mentioned to me that you really wanted to work at 10,000 Things. Tell me why this has been an important theater that you've wanted to be a part of.
Okay, well, I've always wanted to work with 10,000 Things because the first show I ever saw them do was The Music Man. And The Music Man's like a huge cast, usually, like so many people, giant voices, orchestra, blah, blah, blah. But 10,000 Things does theater different than that. So it was, I think, a cast of maybe 7
Wow.
people, or maybe 9, I don't know. And I wasn't sure what to expect. And when I went in, it was like incredible. It changed my life. I cried through the whole show because it
Oh,
was so beautiful. And the mission of like bringing theater to everybody, regardless of like theater can sometimes be inaccessible, I think, to people
mm-hmm.
who can't afford to go see
It
shows.
can be very expensive.
Exactly. And 10,000 Things is like that's not our mission. Like our goal is to
Mm-hmm.
bring it to people who maybe haven't even ever seen a show before in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, as like a person who in the past was a preschool teacher, who has worked at nursing homes, like being able to bring stories to people and have them connect with those stories and the different characters and like maybe see things from a different perspective they would have never thought about if they
Mm-hmm.
didn't get to see this kind of show,
Right.
is something that really speaks to me as a person and how I want the world to be able to connect with each other and see each other. So getting to do this work feels like a alignment, really, I guess.
So they reimagine the shows. But what I also think is really interesting, when I had a friend that was in one of the shows, she's like, we went into a prison
Yes.
and we were right there with them, and the audience becomes such a vital part of informing the actors and how they move through the show that it was a different kind of an experience. And I know you haven't started to do the community shows or any of the shows yet, but I've always been fascinated with. I've not been part of going when it's a community. I've gone to when it's at one of the theaters, but I can imagine and preparing for that. Even in the rehearsals, to be thinking through that you were going to be performing differently, and having seen it, do you have any imaginations of what you're looking to have be experienced in the performances coming up?
Hmm. Well, we talked a lot about how it's different when we see shows because
Mhm.
I think there's like, and same with I worked when working at the Children's Theater. You get a lot of audiences that are young and it might be their first ever performance. So there's not that kind of like, oh, we know we go to a theater. When we go to a theater, we're quiet. We just watch,
Mhm.
and like we laugh when we're supposed to. It's like there are outbursts. There are like kids that are like, hey, what are you doing? You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like, and in 10,000 Things kind of leans into sometimes people might talk to you and sometimes people might ask you questions and you can answer them. You can look at them. You can like we are engaging these people who have come to see the show that we're doing aren't just part of the audience. They're part of the show. Like
Yes.
so that's kind of
So
exciting.
you can add in your own improv as appropriate.
Yes, yes,
That
yes,
sounds
yes.
great. Well, when I looked at the mission, and you mentioned the mission, 10,000 Things awakens the creative spirit of audiences and artists by bringing essential and exceptional theater to people from all backgrounds and life experiences.
Yeah,
And their vision that they've outlined is to ignite empathy and revolutionize belonging through the power of compelling and inspiring theater. And I love the idea of empathy as being part of understanding connection. That it's
yeah.
not just connecting, it's going at a deeper level of really what you want to do with the audience. It's not just performing out, it's a performing with.
Yes. Yes, that's so true. And empathy, I think, is such like a key factor in connecting, in sharing something with other people. And live theater is so exciting because it's different from TV. You can't like stop it. You can't rewind it. Like you're having a very specific experience with a bunch of often strangers in a room together that like sure you could go to a movie theater too, but it's a different experience because the people in front of you you're seeing like in the flesh
Right.
moving through this scene and like the communal experience that you can have at one of a live performance no matter where you go is one of a kind.
And you don't have staging, you don't have costumes per se.
We
Oh, you
do
do?
have
Oh,
costumes.
good, good, good.
We have like when you say staging, I mean I take that as like choreography or like
Yeah.
kind of
Oh,
like
no, you
movement
have
and
choreography. I know that. But you don't like have carry sets from
oh,
place to place.
we have little pieces. Like we've got
Okay.
like boxes, we've got like little set pieces.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's very different from like, what you'd see at the Guthrie or something.
Well, I'm also interested in sort of the multicultural aspects as well. And in in their website, it looks they outline how they actively work to eliminate barriers, to participate, cultivate equitable practices. Whether you're an audience member, artist, staff, or volunteer, each person's unique perspective is necessary. That to me feels very integrative and very culturally sensitive, as well
Mhm.
as culturally intelligent. How do you bring all those different cultures on stage? How do you bring your whole self to a program?
I think that's really helpful is that our artistic director and director of the show, Caitlin, has cast a bunch of different people from different backgrounds and different like life experiences, and we are welcome to bring that to the room. We are welcome to share that with anything that is being staged, is like being blocked or choreographed, and we are open to ask questions, to like suggest, to anything like that. And so, in casting people with like rich um differences, we are bringing those to the production and then bringing that to everybody who comes to see the show or that we bring the show to.
And for you, what are some of the things that you're bringing to the show?
Ooh, good question. Well, I think for me, when it comes to Rosabella, I am bringing a stubbornness, kind of like silly but brash life experience for her that isn't necessarily my experience, but I think is like very appropriate for the character. I think when I did a reading of the show a long time ago, and the way that the show, and I've seen a couple productions, and she is like a very strong character. But I think what we're exploring with her is I'm bringing like she is doing everything that she can. She's doing the best that she can. And I think she's right about everything. And, like that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Well, we've teased the audience with who maybe Rosabella is.
Mhm.
So, to give a little background, A Most Happy Fella, and that is the correct title, right? The
Yes.
Most Happy
Yes.
Fella is about a waitress who finds love note from a mysterious customer and begins a letter writing romance with a man who calls her Rosabella. And little does she know that the object of her growing love is Tony, an aging immigrant wine grower, fearing his Rosabella will reject him. So Tony sends her a photograph of his handsome foreman instead. And as her visit approaches, the stage is set for confusion. hurt and betrayal before finally blooming into love and understanding. This return to a beautiful story marks the revival of uh, 10,000 Things' second ever musical.
Yes.
S-
Yes.
So tell me about this romance going on.
Okay, so the romance is kind of a tricky part of that story, I guess. I mean, I think especially when we're telling the story today versus when the show that it was based on was written was like in the 1920s.
Mhm.
And then when the show came out again, like as a musical version by Frank Lesser, it was 1956. So like we have this kind of different way of viewing the world than we do today.
Mhm.
So their only way of communication was through letters. And we know what catfishing is, right? Where
Right.
you are like, I'm this person, but really you're not this person.
Uh-huh.
And so there's a little bit of catfishing in this, in that he's sending the wrong picture. And so the only way to know about anybody is through their letters, is through the mail, through, like, and he's from a different county, different total place. So arriving in a different place after leaving everything you have known, everything you've ever had behind you, with no way of going back, to find that the person that you are planning to get married to is not who they said they were, makes for a very like, ooh, kind of like crunchy thunderstorm of a relationship as we start out.
And with that concept, do you keep true to it being letters or do you update it to emails?
Well, if we update it to emails, then it's kind of a she's got mail situation. But we kept it as letters. We
Okay.
we yes, it is true to the original.
Uh,
And yes.
and does the relationship evolve, and then how do you change your perspective when you realize that this person has not been honest with you?
I think that okay, so in the plot of the show and the way that it goes and the way that we're choosing is that like oftentimes the ingenue, the female lead, doesn't really get to make choices, right? Things just happen to her. In our version, she is kind of making her own decisions. Like, is she stuck within circumstances that she maybe can't control? Yes, but she gets to choose how she responds to those, and she is going to stubbornly choose how she responds to those circumstances. And I think sometimes the more you know about a person, the more you learn about them, the harder it is to not like them, usually.
Mhm.
And so this show is kind of about seeing that everybody has faults and everybody's made mistakes, and understanding that, like, despite it all, she wasn't in love with the picture of this person. She was in love with the person that she was writing letters to. And that person does exist. And like, because of fear and because of, well, mostly like worry and anxiety, sometimes people make choices that are bad choices in like a snap moment. So kind of realizing the humanity of like making a mistake and being able to forgive somebody.
And the reconsideration process.
Yes.
What I find interesting when I chat with actors is some of their own process of getting to know the character, that they and you need to pull from who you are, of course, to
Yes.
to bring it to life. There's parts of you that may not be a main feature, but when you bring it to life in another character, it becomes more of a big focus. You say that she's kind of stubborn,
Yes.
and she makes up her mind. I like that she's a waitress and she's stubborn. That's great. You have to be kind of a boss when you are taking orders and managing your table. I know this from my own waitressing experience way back when. Um, but are there things that you did an aha moment in bringing this character to life, in finding something within yourself? And if you'd share it, that I think finding that connection is always interesting.
Um, I think that what you're saying is exactly right. You always bring yourself to any character that you play. And I do think there's a lot of me that I brought to Rosabella. I think that my aha moment was when we were reading through the play. I brought my own preconceived notions of Rosabella to the rehearsal process, going kind of like, okay, how am I going to make this character like XYZ? Like, how am I going to make her a little more of a strong person. How am I gonna? And then when I was reading the script, I was like, you know what? It's already there. Actually, I was being judgmental of her
Oh,
before I
no,
even.
really? But you have to start somewhere, right? So you start with that, but you let yourself be influenced by what you learn.
Exactly. Yes. And I think there were moments that, and I can't think of the specific moments, but I know there were moments when I was going through the script that I went, "Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense."
Mhm.
Or like she maybe makes a mistake
Uh,
of certain kinds that you'll have to find out, come see the show. You'll have to find what kind of mistakes is Rosabelle making? She's perfect.
well,
But
with that in mind, what would you tell someone that you want to have come see the show?
I would say that this is a really beautiful and heartwarming production of The Most Happy Fella. There's songs in this that are stunning, um, and that you don't really get to hear very often because this show hasn't really been done that frequently, or I think around the Twin Cities area,
Mhm.
at least for sure. I would say, like, come see the amazing talent in this production and see a different way of performing a show. We do not ever turn the lights out. We involve the audience. It's kind of a bare bones, but like so full of life production that like you're not gonna see shows like this anywhere but at 10,000 Things.
And are there some fun, sharp turns that take place besides, oops, this isn't the person I fell in love with?
Well, yes, there are. I'm not going to tell you what they
Of
are,
course
but
you're
there
not.
are some surprises along the way. There's some bumps. There's hiccups for sure, and not just Tony is lying.
Ooh, but wait, there's more. Well, I understand also that because you don't have like huge Guthrie giant sets, it's probably easier to go from one place to another for performing. And you've got quite a few different ones. You're going to be at the Open Book, the Hennepin United Methodist Church, Capri Theater, 825 Arts, and then there's some community hosted performances. So, what we're encouraging is to have folks go to 10,000things.org, and then there's backslash the dash most dash happy dash fella, or just go to 10,000things.org and you can look up season and then you can pull up the most happy fella. Also, if folks just have questions and they want to, just find out a little bit more and want to send an email, we have an email address, contact@10,000things.org. Susie, it's been wonderful to have a chance to get to know you, to know a little bit more about the play, a little bit more about 10,000 Things. And I'm going to let you have a last comment that you might want to do a shout out. And then I'll just have to wait to come see you again in the show.
Yes,
Oh, which I should
please.
say, April 29th is your opening, and you run through June 7th, right?
Right. Yes.
Terrific.
Well, I'm just so excited that I got to be here. This is like so much fun to talk to you about the show. I love performing with all the actors in the show. Like, please, that's my shout out to everybody who's on the production, who's doing anything. Like, everybody is incredible. And I just feel so lucky to be able to get to bring this piece of theater to so many different people.
And will you be singing, dancing, and acting in this show?
I will be singing, dancing, and acting in this show.
So a full-throated performance will be brought to you by.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, thank you again, Susie. And in our next segment, we've got David Lapaco. And David has just finished up writing a book about growing up, especially from your high school, college years on, and discovering the path, the journey of not knowing what you know. Or, as the book calls it, I didn't know what I didn't know. So stay with us for our conversation with David Lapaco, and we look forward to continuing our artistic journey with our author. Thanks so much, Susie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good morning. I'm Lori Fitz, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you joined the conversation. We are on a journey of art and connections. We had a great conversation about 10,000 Things in our last segment. And in this segment, we're going to do more of maybe an internal journey. We had the external on theater, and this is an internal journey. We have a author, a scholar, a professor, and a friend, David Lapaco, joining us. And he has written a novel. He didn't know what he didn't know about a character named Jack. And as you're writing, David, it's really about coming of age, path to adulthood. I'm fascinated with the character Jack, and he didn't know what he didn't know then. And I'm wondering, because we all write from what we know, we all write from who we are. Did Jack have that answered for him, or did the questions just become more interesting as he's looked back at this coming of age?
Well, Lori, thanks for having me first.
Sure.
I don't know that Jack was really tuned in to what he needed to know. He thought he pretty much had it made. He was very successful in high school in many ways, academically and extracurricular activities and debate and things like that. And life hadn't quite hit him in the face yet. And he had sort of a protected childhood in many ways. Grew up in a little neighborhood, just one older brother, very controlled and limited exposure to the world. And so when the world kind of came at him, he didn't quite know what to do with it, and he didn't realize how many things there were that he did not know.
And so much hits you when you go off to college.
Yeah.
There's just so many different things to process.
Yeah. Well, Jack, and again, I needed a psychological buffer. I couldn't write in the first person.
So
I
you didn't want to do a memoir.
I made it all things that happened to Jack, although the very last paragraph, I have a little spill the beans moment where I say, in case you think the author was making all this up, it's all the author's personal experience, every detail. But, Jack had a crush on his freshman English professor. He was still 17. He didn't know what to do with it. Jack encountered people who were gay, and this was well before the GLBTQIA movement. And so he just thought something strange was happening, but he didn't even know what it was. And so at every turn, even things involving sexuality, he was a virgin. He didn't understand all of the things that are part of courtship. He didn't know how to get in and out of relationships. I mean, it was just a blur of things that he kind of tried to cope with, meanwhile trying to go to school and deal with the rest of his life.
And you're moving from high school that's very structured, and your family's very much a part of your life. I mean, you get launched, and suddenly there you are, and every expectation gets, if not challenged, an opportunity to live through and make up your own choices. And I think that's part of what I got out of this as well, is how do you make those choices?
Yeah, and it was sort of a be careful of what you wish for moment, because in high school I was really quite successful in academically, in debate. Things that I had written were in the actual Minneapolis Star or Minneapolis Tribune. I was chosen to be the teen topper one week. They would feature with a photo.
Topper?
This
What is a
Minneapolis
teen
Star would take one high school student in the metro and feature them, do a little bio with a photo.
Oh my.
And so I was the teen topper one week. So, I mean, I thought I was very successful,
Sure.
but then I realized that there were so many things I was totally unsuccessful at that it was just jarring. It was a crisis of confidence in terms of who I was. So I think that's the main thing that I was trying to deal with at that point in time.
And in some ways, you're still dealing with that process because it's been floating around in your mind in terms of leading you to want to write about it.
Yeah. And, all relationships have potential problems and potential promises. All relationships can be kind of messy and unpredictable. You need to find ways to deal with that mess and psychologically manage through all kinds of turbulent situations. I mean, that stuff doesn't go away. But I think the first time you experience it, in this case, as I was coming of age in high school and college, it was especially earth-shattering for me.
It makes a huge impression, and we navigate after the fiascos of our initial challenges and go, I really don't want to go to that fiasco again. So, what other choices can I make? When you were doing it and you were writing this book and looking back at those fiascos, did anything have a new perspective? Did you have any aha moments that went, oh, Here's another way I guess I could look at it.
I suppose the main aha moments were to, be gentle with yourself, Jack, David. There were reasons why things happened. It wasn't easy. You shouldn't blame yourself too much. I better understood how things played out the way that they did. Obviously, I wished I'd had or could do a redo on a number of those things, but I learned from them in various ways. And at the end of the book, it's a little bit didactic at the end. I tried to summarize, in essence, what I thought I had learned living through that period of my life. And there were a lot of different things. And all of them, I think, contributed to my being able to be a more fully functioning adult.
Would you encourage others to do a deep dive in an idea or something that's floating within them? Should they take that as a incentive to go, okay, I need to write about this to figure it out for myself?
You mean like a deep dive about their past?
Yeah,
Or
whatever it is
Yeah.
this was floating around for you, and I know you well enough to know that you like to understand things, and this helped at least put some perspective on understanding it as well as sharing it with others. Is that a process that you'd encourage others to do?
Well, for the most part, yes. I do run into people. I've saved all the letters I've gotten over the
nice.
years. I've offered to send those letters back to people. Say, you sent me about 15 letters back in the 70s. I'd like if you'd like to read them. No, I wouldn't want to go back there. And, there are some people who just refuse to go back in time. And there's a case to be made for that. However, I think shutting yourself out from that is, in the end, kind of a self-defeating sort of thing. I don't know that you can ever totally divorce yourself of the past. And I think looking at the past and kind of taking account of who you are is a really valuable thing and gives my life more texture and more meaning and more depth than it would if I just said, oh, I'm just here today doing whatever I want to do today, and here I am. No, I'm the product of a whole lot of things that happened over many decades, and to understand that is to just enrich your understanding of yourself, and I think to be better able to function in the world. So I sort of encourage it, but I know there are some people who really don't want to go there.
Well, it takes perhaps the word courage to be doing self-reflection, because looking at things that are painful can be challenging, but knowing that going through that process of looking at the self-reflection of what does it all mean,
Yeah.
what did happen back then, why did I struggle, or what were the pathways, and the what ifs, I think are healthy to do. If it comes out that you have the aha moment, the realization, I can be gentle with myself. I did learn some things, but you don't have to negate them either, right?
Yeah. And I think that if I felt any sort of mission beyond the self-serving mission of trying to understand myself, it was to bring these things out because people often don't talk about them. And it can be just about anything. I mean, one of the things I mentioned in there is in 11th grade, I'd heard about rubbers and condoms. I had no idea. Jack
What
had
is
no
that?
idea what that was.
And how
it's
it works.
How does that serve me to
Yeah.
be ignorant about these things? And so if you take that and multiply it out many-fold, that was part of my life. And so there is a certain part of the book that the publisher describes as sometimes raw, which I think is the way of saying I didn't mince words
Right.
about certain things because I think we've kind of tiptoed around them, and as a result, people have not been well served by being ignorant. And I mentioned GLBT issues. I wasn't tuned into that. Nobody was really back then until Ellen DeGeneres, was on the cover of Time and said, "Yep, I'm gay."
Yeah.
It was kind of always submerged, and I don't know that anybody was well served by that type of ignorance. So I've tried to be very blunt about some things in ways that are a little scary and did involve a certain amount of courage. But I think I thought that was the one contribution I could make that would be sort of positive.
And moving from a script that you grow up in with your family, and the script has this is the culture and these are the things and how you view the world, to opening yourself up to putting that script aside and questioning into some of the script, I thought was interesting. Questioning into some of what you learned from your family and what you then had to think about for your own point of view.
Yeah, and we didn't do a lot of self-reflection about my family, and it was like anything else. It was very mixed. It wasn't like a show on TV like Ozzie and Harriet. It wasn't all wonderful, but it wasn't all nasty either. But it was a nuanced understanding of my family was to realize that there were very many good things about it, but also some things where we were really kind of hurting a little bit. And I don't think we really fully appreciated that. Part of that was just talking about emotions, which we never did. Lepaco is a Finnish name, and Finns are not known for they're known for being pretty stoic and not for expressing their feelings, good or bad. And you pay a price for that when the anger is submerged, or when you never say I love you to somebody, which is something I was unaccustomed to doing because that's the kind of family I grew up in. But it was a very stable family, I was very well supported. They supported me in so many different ways that I'm eternally grateful for that.
And then you're in an environment in the Midwest that is not about being effusive. We are not a culture that is like New York or the East Coast that is very comfortable with letting emotions come out. The culture itself, along with the family, is having a certain tone, a certain style, a certain holdback. Even our responses, well, that's nice or that's interesting, is not necessarily very detailed and has tons of nuance of where you go with it. But overall, it's trying to be kind, I think. I mean, Minnesota and families and Finns and Norwegians and Swedes that have a good part of our legacy here in Minnesota has created that kind of culture, which I think is interesting. So we've sort of talked a little bit around what happens in the book. But I'm going to read from Amazon overview, and you can get this book on Amazon. He didn't know what he didn't know. It's the little overview says, by the time he graduated from high school, Jack thought he had figured it out. Was he in for a shock? He didn't know what he didn't know. That's the title of the book. Follows Jack's winding, often dizzying odyssey on the path to adulthood. He encounters sex and romance, relationships, schools, jobs, politics, family life, cultural differences, along with all of their attendant joys, sorrows, and life lessons. So tell me a little bit about Dizzying Odyssey.
Well, if you think about it in a certain way, it was a dizzying odyssey because all of these things are happening at the same time. I'm trying to be a college student, but I have a crush on my freshman English professor who was probably at that time 24 years old, best as I can determine. And I talked to her on the phone a couple summers ago and it shared some of my experiences, so she found that to be very interesting. So I'm doing that. I'm trying to be on the debate team. I'm trying to find people who I can link up with romantically or just through friendships. I'm dealing with my family situation. My dad has a heart condition. He wound up dying in bypass surgery when I was a sophomore in college. And we're living in a time where political leaders are being assassinated. President Kennedy assassinated in 8th grade, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy assassinated just a week before my high school commencement. And so in the midst of all this cultural mess, there's all these other things going on, and it becomes hard to know what to focus on. And I get that these days, many students are saying that they are in the same situation. And I get that. The details are different, but the dynamic is very much the same.
It gets back to a little bit what we were talking about with a theme of the show being connections. So often when we move into something, we disconnect ourselves from something else and make new discoveries. And in our time now, there isn't as much time. It seems like our life is filled with electronics and technology, and we're so overstimulated by this thought to the next thought to the next thought. And we don't have time to let go, but what does it mean? And what do I think? And how do I navigate with all of this coming at me? It's almost like we're having the opportunity in now our 60s and 70s to look at this and go, what does this mean? And just as we did when we went into college, I think we're entering a new phase in just being an older adult that goes, let's look back at this panorama that took place and take time for finding what that meaning is. And with that, in sharing this book, there's a certain amount of bravery and being able to say at the end, well, Jack is really mean. Tell me about that process of coming to grips with some meaning for yourself and then sharing it with others.
Yeah. Well, I must say my wife Helen was probably an inspiration because she wrote a book many years ago, which is now being republished through Innovative Inc. called Can You See Me? And she wrote it in the first person. And if you think my life was strange and sketchy, she had amazing things happening as she was growing up too. So I give her a lot of credit. She had way more bravery than I would.
Shout out to Helen.
And she's also written a trilogy of novels now, The Brocade Couch, Hidden River, and J&R Ranch, which are also available on Amazon. A little short, shameless plug there. What was your question again?
Well, being able to admit that this is me. And this is what I've dealt with. You know, it's sort of tentatively first going into and creating a character, which I think has some advantages because you can kind of play with some things around Jack that may not be exactly who you are, but to be vulnerable and say, this is me.
Yeah. Well, in our my field of communication studies, you'd probably call me for the most part a high self-monitor. You know, I pay attention to how I might be perceived, how other people will think of me. And so to talk about anything that's a little bit embarrassing or uncomfortable or awkward is not naturally how I'm wired. And so the reaching out part, the courage part for me was to talk about those things and be okay with them. And it's a little bit like your previous guest today, Susie, who talked about the more you get to know somebody, the more you can like them. And I think in the end, even though I'm aware of all these warts that are part of my experience, along with all the good things that have happened, and there are a lot of those, that I have come to like myself better and be okay with myself. And I think that's true.
And
not
okay with the mistakes that we make.
Yeah. And just to live with that and realize that I'm not perfect. And to try to pretend that I'm perfect was fraudulent in some ways, and I don't have to do that, and other people don't have to do that either. And that's how you begin to feel closer to people, is when they will share some of those kinds of things.
When you're vulnerable and allowing that truth to come out. I'm not going to steal the ending where you have sort of some, as you said, the didactic, here's some things that I learned and being able to outline them. But the one that moved me the most was how you came to treasure communications even more and realize how communications is really the key. And your book is about obviously communicating, but that's your life passion as well. You teach it. You've written about it. You've got books out there that people use to teach with. I know we're going to go to a break pretty soon, but I wanted to leave with that note about how ultimately your belief in communications is something you want to encourage others to embrace.
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of students who think I'm a therapist or something, which I am not. It's not really my background. And they'll come into my office sometimes and tell these heartrending stories of things that have been going on with them in connection with other people. And the first question I always ask is, have you talked to them about this? And the answer invariably is no. And so it all begins, just as writing this novella for me was, it all begins with a little bit of courage and a little bit of risk-taking and being willing to talk about these things. Unless you can bring them up, you are nowhere. And I didn't even know how to get out of bad relationships during that period of my life. And there were better relationships around the corner that I could have had, but I was in this relationship and I didn't even know how to broach the subject to the person who I was dating at the time. So instead, I just kind of let things sort of wither away or just avoided them, what we would today call ghosting them, that sort of thing. And that was a dumb way to communicate with anybody. I could have had so much more happiness and contentment if I had just taken the risk to talk to somebody. And it's you do have to learn how to do that a little bit. You have the motivation and the skill. But it all begins with saying, I'd like to talk about this. Would you mind if we talked about this? And most people are way too afraid to go there.
And for lots of reasons, they've had bad experiences or they have to own
Absolutely.
some of their own mistakes. And it's hard if you're stubborn not to want to admit a mistake.
Yeah.
But you also advocate that the journey can bring joy. And I think communications, really good communications, is about connecting, brings joy. Yeah. Well, I do need to go to break. Do go to Amazon and look up He Didn't Know What He Didn't Know. It's by David Lapaco. And it's a terrific book. I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed the journey. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the parts of the book that I found very interesting. So we'll be right back after just a few short, supportive sponsor commercials. So we'll see you soon. Welcome back. We're so glad that you're here with Connections Radio Show. We have been having a wonderful journey of looking at art and how to look at the connections in our life. In our first segment, we talked about 10,000 Things and the performances coming up for those shows. And in our last segment, we were able to have a chance to get to know an author who explored a coming of age. David Lepaco wrote He Didn't Know What He Didn't Know. David is a semi-retired communication studies professor. He's also a champion philosophical essayist, having won the Great American Think-Off in 2015. And I want to do sort of a little reminiscing on that. I had David here before he won, and it was our first time interviewing about the Think-Off. And that's another, and you were on the show just a few weeks ago talking about the one coming up.
Yep.
And I bring it up because there's a philosophy to your book that comes through, maybe not, as you said, didactically. I mean, you see your philosophy that ultimately, like we said in the last segment, is really about being brave and communicating and taking that chance to not just avoid or not deal with things. You're dealing with them now. The book, He Didn't Know What He Didn't Know, kind of travels with a character named Jack, and it's partly inspired by his own experience as a student at Macalester College in the early 1970s. With that, I liked in the last segment that I found out that you went back to some of these folks and talked with them.
I did. I tracked down the English prof that I had a crush on, talked to her on the phone 2 summers ago for about an hour. She lives in Massachusetts now, and I think she was a little bit surprised by everything, but she managed. The central romantic dilemma that I was in through a portion of the book was my real college girlfriend at the time, the one who was the most significant person, who lived in Texas. And after she left Macalester, she went off and did her own thing, went to school at Stanford, went out in the West, and I kind of lost track of her. But maybe every 10 years or so, I might send a note, just a little chatty note. But it'd really been decades since we'd really had any sort of connection. And then when it came time for my 50th college reunion back in 2022, I decided to contact her because I found some old photos that were photos I found looking for the reunion pictures. And I sent them to her and I said, "What do you think?" And then she said, "Oh, thank you so much. I didn't have these." So then we started talking some more, corresponding online. And I realized that she was getting very apologetic, based on the details of the book. If you read the book, she said, "I really wasn't very kind during that time." And I said, "Look, it was a long time ago. I think the statute of limitations has expired. We were young. We were, not very responsible. Everything happened. Let it go."
Yeah.
And so out of that, then we were able to develop a real meaningful friendship. And it turns out that she and her husband have a cabin up north of Bemidji.
Oh.
So now, the last several years, we've seen them. My wife and I have seen them and had dinner with them and done things with them, gone to the Guthrie with them and
Wow.
stuff. And it's been so rewarding to be able to make that connection going back 55 years.
And I love that you both have such a trust in your current relationship that both partners are like, yeah, you were together how many years ago, and there was obviously something that brought you together, an interest and whatnot, that you can now share as two couples together.
Well, I hope so. I think realistically, I'm not sure at this point in time what would actually happen. It's not, again, 1972.
No,
So,
no.
But I think my wife appreciates that I can have someone who's a dear friend
Yes.
and not feel threatened by that, because
Exactly.
I love her to the bottom of my heart, too.
Another shout out to Helen.
Yeah, no, shut up. Hello, dear. But no, but it's been very special to me to make those connections. There have been other connections too that have nothing to do with the book. I've had several meals with my 7th grade social studies teacher.
Wow.
I had dinner this last fall with 4 of my former students when I was a high school teacher back in the mid 70s.
Sure.
They had
And
contacted
you
me.
did that before you came back to graduate school. Did some high
Yes,
school? Yes. Yeah.
I taught high school for a bit. Not very good at it. I talk about that in the
Yes.
book too. And grateful that I was not very good at it, because it forced me to do something else. And it's one of the best failures I've ever had, was to know that I needed to do something different, and put me in the college and university environment, which I've always found to be very special.
And you went on to stay in academia and taught for many years. It was interesting for me because we were in graduate school together. And it was sort of like I felt like I was getting the behind the scenes. Oh. And I think self-perception is interesting to contrast that with my perception of, hey, he had it all together. I mean, he was teaching a variety of things, and always, on time, on charge, and everything was organized. And it was like you knew David was going to get things done.
Yeah, well, part of life is trying to fake people out that way and manage your impression. It's part of our discipline,
Yeah,
is
it is.
self-presentation. But underneath, there's always going to be stuff. I even think about our current president, who conveys a great deal of confidence, but I think underneath there's some real hurt that never comes out, but does come out indirectly, sideways through some of the stuff that he does. So I think we all have that other undercurrent that's going through, good and bad,
Versus our projected persona.
We can try to project it, but that only gets you so far.
Right. Well, just to give a little bit more so folks get intrigued and want to go out and buy this book, in dealing with relationships, the book sort of explores introduction to sex, romance, and the complexities of a long-term connection, education, career, lessons learned through his time in school and various jobs, family and culture, negotiating family dynamics, and the cultural curveballs encountered along the way, personal growth, a journey marked by both joys and sorrows that challenge his initial assumptions about life. There's a lot of misguided confidence initially with Jack, and then how to navigate, like, intimacy and deal with his own sorrow. Are there things that you want to have the audience know also about the book, and to encourage them to go out and read the book? What would be some of those things that you'd want to give them a nudge about?
I think some of it would just involve not only taking stock of their own life, but communicating with others. I still think, even though we're in a more enlightened period, social media, blah, 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 that there are a lot of people who are wandering around who are fairly ignorant about all of these things, and to be helpful in that regard. I mean, I talk in the book about times where Jack had some experiences that he didn't know what was even going on with his body.
Yeah.
And nobody ever told him what it was, or that it was normal. I'll mention, it's not a swear word, but he had a wet dream when he was like a teenager, and he told his mom that he'd wet the bed, and she says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of that." And she didn't let on that this was not
This
your.
wasn't just.
I didn't pee in the bed.
Yes.
I had no idea. What could I have thought it was? Someone should have told me.
Yeah.
And so I think those kinds of conversations.
And I think there's actually less communication going on because of technology, and it takes more work. And this is a good book to look at in terms of thinking about it and doing it yourself. And I think there's another book based on your connections that you made after you wrote it. Book 2, What Jack Did. So thank you, David. Appreciate you being here today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Lori. Thank you.